Our world, as you know, is flirting with protectionism once again. Governments are looking to impose trade barriers, resorting to tariffs to protect their domestic industries. In effect, we are rolling back investments, decades of investments in free trade. And it seems to be in response to China's rise as a manufacturing power, a rise that has, frankly, no parallels in history. China accounts for more than 30% of the world's manufacturing output, which itself is mind-boggling. And they have a big, their domestic consumption is huge, but these goods are also flooding other markets. So the world has to find a way to balance this. The question is trade tariff the way to do it? Or are we inadvertently playing into China's hands? That's what we'll discuss. We have a very interesting panel put together by the crack team of Dr. Samir Saran and ORF. So let's, without wasting any time, start. I'll start with you, Tony Abbott. We've seen different responses to Donald Trump's tariffs. Countries like India and Mexico have decided to wait and watch. Countries like Canada and players like the EU have decided to respond. What do you think is the best way to deal with this?
Well, this is a fascinating topic. Can tariffs trump China? So we've got tariffs, we've got China, we've got Trump. I mean, the three most interesting topics in the world right now. Look, just on China, under its current leadership, China is determined to be, first of all, the world's dominant power by mid-century, and second, to be the world's dominant economy even before that. And I think we have to appreciate that a world dominated by China would be very different from the world we've got, which for most of the last 70 years has been under the Pax Americana, if I might use that phrase. So let's be clear about what China wants to do. Let's also be clear about what the incoming president wants to do. He wants to re-industrialise his country because he thinks that free trade, which China has never practiced, it's used secret subsidies, it's used technological theft, it's used market manipulation, it's used bribery in many parts of the world. He thinks that free trade has basically enriched China and damaged large sections of America. So he wants to use tariffs to re-industrialise his country, which I think is a perfectly reasonable objective. Now, we've got to appreciate that a tariff is a tax. I mean, there are lots and lots of taxes in the name of the green transition. We are imposing a lot of taxes on ourselves, quite apart from the tariff tax that President Trump wants to impose on his own people. But I think that under the circumstances that apply, it is perfectly reasonable for the Americans to apply very substantial tariffs to China. It's just that so far they've imposed more substantial tariffs on their strategic friends than on their strategic foes, and I think that's a bit mystifying.
It is indeed, but you've not responded on what is the best way to deal with this?
Well, I think we have to, I think the democracies, all of the countries that value the rule of law, value human rights, value conceptions of freedom, need to appreciate that communist China is a predator, and we need to cut China out of our critical supply chains, and we need to drastically reduce our economic vulnerability. And tariffs are not the only way of doing that, but they are a very significant way because they will obviously change the price differentials domestically, which China has taken advantage of very substantially over the last 20 years since being admitted by Bill Clinton into the WTO.
Takehiko Matsu, Warren Buffett, the famous American investor, said that these tariffs are like a declaration of war on America's allies. Japan has been an ally for 80 years, as an ally that has stood by the US, and as an ally that now faces the prospect of similar tariffs. Do you agree with this assessment? Do you see this as a declaration of war?
Thank you very much. First of all, I do not think that it's a declaration of war. So firstly, I think that we should not forget that it's a U.S. leadership which enable the world to have this multilateral free trade system. Just I remember that in a Cold War period, U.S. opened their market and together with Western countries established GATT and invited other countries to join this trading system and realize economic growth. And even after Cold War period ended, then Russia and then China was accepted to join this trading system and not GATT, but at that time it's WTO. But as such, we firstly recognize that it's a U.S. leadership. And on the other hand, these days we are now facing an increasing geopolitical tension. Of course, tension between U.S. and China, and the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and the chaotic situation continuing in Middle Eastern countries. So, in this sense, we may be able to say that the foundation or foundational condition of this multilateral trading system might start to be eroded. And indeed, we also see that civil-military fusion are now more and more advancing, and as a result, we are seeing that more scope of the economic activities affecting national security. In addition to that, the supply disruption at the Corona period, as well as weaponization of economic dependence, increasing our awareness of economic security. So we need to address these new challenges of expanding national security threat and economic security needs. So now I understand that U.S. it's much more difficult to get a political support to continue open their markets and accept this trade deficit. But I think such kind of a strategic, such a kind of a structural change was behind this the change of U.S. trade policy. And of course, Japan, we are of course we do not support this additional tariff, and we are now requesting U.S. government not to impose additional tariff to Japan. But at the same time, I think such kind of a structural change of international trade should be well considered and addressed. Thank you.
Jane Hall-Lute, do you think tariffs and barriers as a policy tool have a place in the 21st century? I ask because the world is so interconnected, and I'm sure all of us agree that tariffs hurt the United States as much as the country that it is targeting those tariffs towards.
Thanks. I spent the first half of my adult life in the military, and I've spent a fair amount of time on publicly traded companies, the largest in their industries globally, all multinational companies. What I would say, the equivalent when you come from military or a security background, as I do, is the use of force. And what you learn, and what we have learned over the course of our lifetime, is that force can't do all that needs doing. We've lived through four, I think, very distinct strategic eras over the past decades. The decades after World War II, the big question was, how do we prevent World War III? The big question in the 70s and late 60s and 70s was, how do we prevent nuclear annihilation? Because unless we get a handle on these things, we're going to blow ourselves to smithereens. After the Cold War, when the Berlin Wall fell, the big question was, the US is that much more powerful than anyone else. What will it do with this power? And the question more recently is, how committed is the United States to liberal democratic values? Well, we're very committed to liberal democratic values, but we're also very committed to fairness. And when you look at the economic playing field, in the aftermath of World War II, the US was all about trying to create capable partners. The Marshall Plan, which was fundamentally an economic plan, had three real core elements. One, stable financial markets. Two, increased production. Three, open trade. And that worked really pretty well for the world, including the United States. But what we've learned over the course of time, as the Prime Minister mentioned, is that not everybody's playing fairly, and they're unfairly advantaging. So now, with President Trump's declaratory and actual imposition of tariffs, people are crying foul. Well, hang on a second. A lot of Americans are saying, how would you describe what was going on for the past number of decades when you were taking advantage, subsidies, hidden or otherwise, intellectual property theft, et cetera, So on the one hand, are tariffs a tool in the toolbox? Absolutely. Can they do all that needs doing? Absolutely not.
It's interesting that you portray the American side as the victim, and we can have a discussion on what the Marshall Plan was all about, but that's, I think, a discussion for another day. Let me get in Carla Sands into the conversation as someone who's worked with President Trump, as someone who's advised him on economic issues. Help us understand the thought process here, because most economists and most countries agree that this is a double-edged sword, that it will affect the Americans as much as anyone else. Yet the American president seems confident that it is the other countries and other people who will pay for it and not the Americans.
Well, thanks for the question. President Trump loves the people of America. And over the last 30, 40 years, the middle class in America has really been hollowed out. Where when I was a kid, one wage earner could support a family, buy a house, have a car, put the kids through school. Today, it's not so. The buying power of those middle class families has plummeted. And today it might be two people and they're in an apartment and both the man and the woman are working in a fulfillment center, like an Amazon type fulfillment center, but probably not as nice as Amazon, just struggling to make ends meet, not getting ahead. And the promise in America was that your kids could be expected to do better than you did. And that social contract has fallen apart. And President Trump saw the pain of the great middle class, and that's the majority of Americans, and said, I can fix this. And he understands that America hasn't been treated well, and it's our own fault, but we haven't been treated well in trade. Most of our trading partners take advantage of us. Just one example, when the US sells cars into the EU, they charge us 10% tariff. When we import European cars, it's a 2.5% tariff. But it goes much higher. In Canada, there's over 100% tariffs on some of our dairy and meat, and other countries also charge us very high tariffs, much higher than ours. He's looking for reciprocity, and that's why he's saying, if you tariff us 25%, we're going to tariff you 25%, hoping that the tariffs come down, and understanding that we need to onshore some of the production that really the US government and state governments encouraged company owners to send abroad, often to Asia, recently to China. And those company owners forgot to take care of the place and the people that made them successful. And so they broke that social contract as well. And so President Trump is looking to have reciprocity, fair and reciprocal trade on a level playing field. And that hasn't been the case since I've been alive. So that's what we're looking for, and he's going to get that done. And what it's going to do is help us bring our manufacturing jobs back to the US. And you can see just Japan has committed their prime minister to $1 trillion of investment in the US. President Trump's brought over $2 trillion now investment into the United States, and he's just getting started. So this will be the trend during his presidency, and if we're successful and have another conservative president after him, that will accelerate and be something where we're taking care of the American people and fixing our broken infrastructure. Because I don't know if you've been in the US lately or not, but in many cases, third world countries have some better infrastructure in some cases than we do, and that's not acceptable for the United States. And it is about countering China as well, as some of my friends up here said.
the current administration does not seem to be making a lot of, it does not seem to be differentiating between China and allies and adversaries.
Well, Europe has a lot, very high tariffs on our goods and non-tariff barriers. Our friends don't treat us so well either.
Okay. Alicia Garcia Herrero, what do you make of these comments so far? Do you think that we are genuinely entering an era of protectionism and the age of global free trade is over?
Yeah, so thanks for the invitation. Very glad to be here. Let me start by saying that I wish other countries would have the problems the US says it has. There's much bigger problems out there. And not only that, many are self-inflicted. So on that note, let me develop that idea for what it's worth. The first thing to say is that what you think is a very big trade deficit is actually something that Ricardo Hausmann, famous Venezuelan trade economist, calls dark matter. What is that? When you actually look at your magnificent, let's face it, tech companies and multinationals in the world, just the repayment of the profits they make in the world would actually vanish your trade deficit. Okay, so you actually don't have, if you measure it properly, a trade deficit. That's number one. Number two, and I get it, you know, we all want to reindustrialize. It's not only the US. Even India, manufacturing to GDP is falling in India, and they actually need a lot of jobs here too. So we're all chasing these jobs. I get it, and it's, you know, it's obviously any president's duty to find them. But the question is, how do you want to find them? There's two ways to find jobs out there. One is carrots, and the other one is sticks. I would classify tariffs on the stick side. Other ways to do that is to actually entice investment. And let me tell you, the US is the largest recipient of foreign investment in the world with Europe. But recently, since IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, it is the US by far. So you were already getting this investment. Now, you can, of course, twist arms to get more. But in a way, you were already getting this investment. The question is, maybe it wasn't creating the right jobs. Maybe it wasn't filtering into the society. But that has different solutions because the money was getting into the US, let alone since 2022. Big money. Only Taiwan, I mean, I spent a lot of time in Taipei. I mean, Taiwan spent, what, 60 billion in the US in the last 2 years? 60 billion? Now you're getting 100 billion for TSMC. Great. But the more that is forced, the less effective it will be. So I would like the US to realize that, gosh, you're such a strong economy already. You don't need to do this. Because you actually are engulfed in what will in history become the next industrial, of course, we call it elsewhere, revolution. And you're leading it. So for me, it's actually a pity. Let me tell you, a pity that the US resorts to something as belittling as tariffs. And why? Because tariffs don't work. I'm sorry, I'm an economist. That's all I can say. Why do they don't work? Because first, you're about to tariff the whole world, let me tell you. I mean, close to that. The minute you tariff everybody, there's nowhere else to go. If you only tariff China, this is what happened Trump 1.0, you will get it through Vietnam. So in a way, either or, there's a way out. If you want to reindustrialize, you need to be productive. And you actually are becoming more productive. This is what I'm saying. It's such a pity because you were getting there. You know, total factor productivity increase has ballooned because of the AI revolution. So I'm like, what a pity, what a timing to get into this. I will stop here.
Fantastic. Very.
And I'll just respond that I must say, and I appreciate your comments, but the idea of having conflict and not being prepared with a strong industrial base where we make our own aluminum and our own steel is impossible. So we have to onshore these in order to be the global superpower that everyone expects us to be, and we certainly intend to be. So we have to have that strong manufacturing base, which has really gone away. And that's what President Trump is doing as quickly as he can. And it is a whole of government approach. And I'm very, very excited and positive about this.
Tony Abbott, let me bring you in here. It's not just tariffs. We've seen other sort of barriers and curbs. For instance, in technology, the US has limited the sale of chips and semiconductors to both allies and adversaries. The big target seems to be China. And they try to make sure that China does not have access to their cutting-edge technology. And yet China went ahead and first did what they did with Huawei and then with DeepSeek. So either the barriers are not working or the barriers have been inadequate. And what is the lesson there for the Americans and the rest of the world?
Well, I mean, I'm not an unmitigated admirer of the current president, although I think I understand what he's trying to do. And he was the first serious person in the United States to appreciate the China challenge. And interestingly, the one thing that there appears to be bipartisan agreement on in Washington these days is the need for America to respond suitably and strongly to the China challenge. And look, tariffs are a blunt instrument. The costs of tariffs are paid by American consumers. Tariffs will raise prices in America, but they will also change the patterns of consumption so that more consumer goods and more intermediate goods are produced in America as opposed to in China. So, and look, there is a race on. There is a technological race on in things like AI and supercomputing and quantum physics, all these things. And for too long, we in the democratic countries have been too complacent about all of this. We have assumed that the leadership of every other country is as concerned with normal everyday things like better schools, better hospitals, more roads, higher wages. We've made these assumptions about the leadership of other countries, and that's not true of them. I mean, Xi Jinping is burning to take Taiwan as quickly as he can by force if necessary. Putin is burning to dominate Europe and recreate the Russia of Peter the Great. The Ayatollahs are desperate to create a new caliphate.
But is the American response to all of them working?
Well, inevitably, it's going to be a mixed bag, and the challenge at the moment is for America to do what it thinks is necessary to appropriately reindustrialise without, in the process, breaking the bonds of trust which over many decades have been built up between America and its allies. And this is where I think that suddenly whacking a 25% tariff on Canada, of all countries, does look a bit rough, particularly given that it was indeed President Trump in his first incarnation who renegotiated the North American Free Trade Deal, and at the time said that the renegotiated deal is the best trade deal ever. So I would counsel to have free trade with your friends, but by all means, have very high tariffs with your foes.
Well, I think everyone's being so diplomatic. In one of the previous conversations, someone said that this is a pandemic-like moment for us when we decoupled and de-risked from China and then stopped short of saying that we're doing the same with the United States. But that seems to be the sentiment, that the world is exploring alternatives. Let me take this to Takehiko Matsu. Some analysts believe that this tariff war could push other countries to work together and decouple, quote unquote, from the United States. For Japan, there is a heavy reliance on Chinese imports. And a report in 2024 said that almost 2/3 of your crucial imports come from China. Now, faced with this US pressure, do you think that you will start engaging with the Chinese more, or will you keep sticking to the policy of de-risking?
Thank you very much. First of all, as you know, China is a neighboring country of ours. And China is one of the biggest trade partner for us as well. And we hope that our economic tie with China will be well kept or maintained. On the other hand, also we need to recognize the increasing kind of a needs to ensure economic security, especially in my view, the kind of key elements of this economic security is refraining from over-dependence on one single supplier. And in this context, we need to diversify our suppliers and again, so somehow refraining from over-dependence. And so in short, so we want to keep our strong economic tie with China, but at the same time, we need to consider this economic security, economic security needs. And so we do not want to decouple with Chinese economy, but whether this is a de-risking or not. So in my view, it's a kind of economic enhancement of the economic security, refraining from over-dependence on one single country. But if you call it de-risking, then it might be de-risking. But it's a kind of our position, our thought. Thank you.
Carla Sands, the first Trump administration also triggered a trade war with China, and that shaved billions from the global economy, and the likes of Bloomberg and Economist declared it a failure. What makes you so confident that this time it'll be different?
Well, I think it's actually China's at a trade war with us, not us with China. So, China's decoupling. China has their 100-year marathon that ends in 2049. And China wrote their paper, Made in China 2025. Well, here we are in 2025, and they've pretty much fulfilled most of their goals of the technology, the high-level manufacturing, the internal consumption, and then the export to the rest of the world. But I look at what China's threatened against the West and the US specifically, like the pharmaceutical precursors that they provide to most of the world, like although India is doing some of those, like the rare earth minerals that they mostly control around the world, which we all need for our cell phones and our defense equipment. And then I look at the energy policy of most of our allies, but especially Europe, rich countries in the EU, how they're in the net zero, I would call it a religion of climate change that is an anti-human deindustrialization agenda. And I hope that Europe will wake up and understand that the green energy that they're promoting actually enriches China and hands them the control of their economy and the home heating and all the uses that they need energy for, transportation, and that they will embrace the basic bedrock of energy, which is oil and gas, which is coal, clean coal, nuclear, and not be afraid of nuclear, which is completely green. And I hope that Europe will pivot and work with Trump to increase their economies and get reliable, cheap energy available to all of their citizens and their industrial base so that the deindustrialization happening among the engine of Europe will end and we will share a better future together. That's what I hope that you will work with Trump.
Alicia.
Thanks for the invitation as a European, but shale gas is not very cheap, so certainly not from the US. But let me go back to what Trump really wants. I'm sure you know better than me, but if I hear correctly, Trump wants reindustrialization. And that's fine. But the question I have is, can the US reshore everything it needs? I hope the answer is no. I hope, because if it were yes, I don't think American consumers would be happy about what it means to reshore everything back to the US. So the question is, let's call it supplementary supply chains, yeah? Supplementary. We don't need to really, make China disappear, I hope. Yeah, it's there. And, there's a lot of countries trading with China. So imagine we want to create a supplementary supply chain, just in case supply chain. Just in case something happens and we can't trade with China. Just in case China retaliates. Just in case. we create a supplementary supply.
China
chain.
does retaliate.
There's no just in case about this.
Okay.
I mean,
I've been here with you.
China boycotted $20 billion worth of Australian exports despite a
Yes.
free trade deal that I negotiated with China
Sir.
because it wanted to punish us
Yes.
for the temerity of calling for a full, transparent international
Yes,
investigation
I-
into the Wuhan virus. So
They did the same thing to Norway.
China,
Yeah.
China,
Yes.
China
So
tried
if I
to
can
corner
finish.
the rare earths market, and then Japan, to its great credit,
Yes.
helped to keep the one Australian competitor to China in rare earths. Japan helped to keep that going a decade ago after China had banned Japan
Yeah.
from getting any rare earths.
Tony, so I've been here, same panel with you 2 years ago, and I was making those arguments. So you don't need to convince me. I agree, but that's actually not the point now. The point is that we need a supplementary supply chain, that we're heavily dependent on China, and that the way to do it is not to fight each other as we are doing now. This is the point.
We're not fighting with anybody.
Let me let me get in Jane Hall Lute here. I'm no fan of China, but let me ask you this. Would it be fair to say that we are witnessing Western opportunism in its truest form? As long as free trade worked for all of you, you said free trade, globalization. Now that Asian countries, now that the global South is catching up, you say this is not fair, there are too many tariffs and so on. Is this what it's all about?
Okay, and I thought I was just going to alienate everybody on this panel, but I may alienate everyone in this room. A, there's no such thing as clean coal. B, I'm still reacting. I guess I'm trying to process Elisa's comment that, the rest of the world, wishes it had USA's problems. The United States wishes the rest of the world would share its burdens that it's been carrying for the past decades. And so the point is, I think, is this just us awakening to the fact that people are catching up, that global economies, powerful economies, important economies, vital economies like the economy of India are making the kind of progress that they had? Do you think we resent that? That was the whole point. It was the whole point. The United States wants capable partners around the world, not client states, okay, not dependencies. We want capable partners. And that includes partners in the global South. And so, no, I don't just think this is all about, keeping people down. This is really about lifting people up. Look, what the United States has an interest in 4 things at this moment in its history. It has an interest in a safe and secure homeland. We all do, wherever we live. It has an interest in a dynamic economic engine that can generate new wealth. That's a high bar. By the way, we are doing better than anybody else. We're doing pretty well, but we know we could be doing so much better, and there are parts of our economy that are not. The third thing we need are strong friends and allies who are willing to be capable partners to the United States. And the fourth thing we need is
Who is an
predictable
ally of the
relations
US
with
today?
others.
Who is an ally of the US today?
But it's a technical term. There are a lot, and there are many in this room. And so you may not like what the United States is doing right now. Does that mean you're not our allies? That's not a question for us.
No. If the US is going to be imposing tariffs on everyone, if you're going to question what NATO is doing and whether NATO should be paying its bills, there are conversations that leaders have in closed rooms, and then there are conversations which also sound like threats. So I want to understand, who is a US ally in this day and age?
So, I think I answered the question. And if you're asking about NATO, it was my husband who was the ambassador to NATO. So you've got the wrong loot.
Okay, let me ask you this, Tony Abbott. Where does this leave multilateral organizations like, for instance, the World Trade Organization? What does the WTO do now? Now that countries are imposing tariffs, and then some other countries are going to the WTO complaining about those tariffs. Do they have any relevance, or are they going to fade into oblivion?
Well, there's no doubt that considered in isolation, free trade adds to wealth. But that's not all it does. It changes the pecking order and it can cause a whole lot of difficult and painful adjustments for different sections of different countries. And this is where I think we've got to appreciate that maximising wealth is not the only objective. It's a very important objective, but it's not the only objective. And while personally I don't particularly like it when the American president talks about turning Canada into the 51st state and taking back Greenland, I can see what he's trying to do here. He is trying to let the rest of the world know that America has been paying a high price and a heavy burden to be the world's policeman, and it wants other countries to step up. And frankly, other countries should step up. I mean, India, for instance, should be a leader of the free world. It really should be. I mean, the great thing about India is that for 7 decades, often under enormous difficulties, India has preserved the rule of law and democracy, an absolutely admirable achievement. So why shouldn't India be, with the United States, a leader of the free world, as opposed to getting in with bad company at BRICS? I mean, why should India not step up and be a leading democracy as opposed to a junior partner to Russia and China?
India is a leading democracy, and India is a member of the
BRICS. Of course it is,
but
India could do so much more. For instance, I heard a suggestion at one of the sessions this morning that India might provide peacekeeping troops for Ukraine. That's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. If India is prepared to do more of that, well, I think that it would be making a wonderful contribution. It would be doing the sort of thing that America has been doing for 7 decades and hasn't received, I think, suitable recognition.
India provides peacekeeping forces to a lot of countries that the Western press and the Western powers don't often talk about. And it is under the UN framework, as I'm sure you're aware, as against the Americans who, with their burden, end up entering Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. But
Iraq? Now, I mean, you're not going to defend the Taliban, surely. I mean, the Taliban was a monstrous regime, yes. An absolutely monstrous regime.
They're back. They're worse than before.
And look, it was to America's credit that the Taliban were gone. And frankly, it's a pity that President Biden cut and ran from Kabul and let the Taliban back.
They're back with American weapons this time. But let me get in our Japanese friend here, Takei Komatsu. What is the way out? How do countries deal with this tariff wormhole? How do you get out of it? And you understand that, you know, the points that everyone else has made, that there is a trade imbalance with countries like China. So if tariff is not the way, how do you do it? What is your advice to countries dealing with Trump and to Donald Trump himself?
As you know, Director, I do not want to emphasize this point, but we also have a trade surplus against US.
Keep that a secret.
And of course, we are now making efforts to increase our trade and investment with US in a mutually beneficial manner. And through these efforts, we hope that we could find a way to request US not to impose additional tariff or lift their additional tariff on Japan. This is a kind of bilateral efforts, but at the same time, we need to make some efforts in international kind of field. And so as I mentioned before, now we are seeing 2 big challenges for multilateral trading system. One is civil-military fusion, and the other one is this economic security. And whether for these challenges, WTO could be well functioning, unfortunately, we cannot expect so much at this stage. And we probably need some complementary framework to help WTO or continue working. And what is a possible complementary framework? For example, in my view, in any case, we need to address this economic security issue. And as I mentioned before, key of this economic security should be refraining from over-dependence on one single supplier. In other words, building a reliable, resilient supply chain with like-minded partners as much as possible. And I think this is a kind of a opportunity for us to find some way to cooperate with the US and other like-minded countries. And I do hope that such framework could be well considered. Maybe we need to request, we need to make a commitment for stable supply for critical materials. We may also need to commit the kind of a mutual assistance in the case of emergency or supply disruption. And we may need to allow minimal government's intervention to refrain from over-dependence. Such kind of agreement or kind of a soft law might be considerable. It's my thought, and I personally think this is only the way out of such tariff wormhole. Thank you.
Right. We have less than 10 minutes left. Let's open this to questions.
Oh, hello everyone. I'm Shreyas. I work at Deloitte India as a business consultant. My question is, excuse me one second. Given the fact that we are in the middle of the tariff war, what role can groupings like Quad play in stabilizing the trade and security in the Indo-Pacific region?
The question for?
It's for entire panel.
That will take another hour.
I would love to hear from Mr. Tony about regarding this.
Well, I think the Quad is a very, very important development, and all credit to the late Shinzo Abe of Japan for proposing it, and all credit to Narendra Modi for turning it into a reality. And the important thing is to keep the momentum going. It's an informal grouping, no written document, no formal organisational structure, not against anyone, but for incredibly important things, for the rule of law and for the rights of all countries not to be bullied by anyone else, and with a preference for freedom and democracy. So this is potentially an incredibly significant development, but it's only going to work if there is sustained interest and commitment from the top down in all four countries. It can't be something that waxes and wanes. It's got to be something which is kept alive by a complete commitment from all four of them. And in the end, I suppose the great thing about the Quad is that it's not an American-led body. It will work and work well if America and indeed Japan and Australia respect the leadership role that India has to have in making the Quad everything that it should be.
Yeah, may I? Hi, my name is Shreyash, and I'm a columnist. Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Thank you for the interesting discussion. This was one of the best sessions I've attended today. My question is to Tony, actually. You want your allies, one of the sentiments from the panel was that you want your allies to be independent, strong, self-reliant, right? However, when your allies want to be independent and strong, you call arrangements like BRICS bad company. And President Trump also threatens against de-dollarization. So how does it exactly work? And also on the side note, why can't the West digest strategic independence of its allies, especially when it's coming from the global South? Thank you.
Well, I don't want any country to have a bad relationship with anyone, but I think you've also got to appreciate your interests and your values. And I don't think that it's in India's interests to see Asia dominated by China or to see Europe dominated by Russia. And it's certainly not in accordance with India's values to see dictatorships flourish at the expense of democracies under the rule of law. And whatever faults the democracies have, at least there's a commitment to liberal pluralism in those countries, which doesn't exist in places where if you say the wrong thing, you suddenly get too close to a window, or if you say the wrong thing, your plane blows up, or if you're of the wrong ethnic background, well, you might find your province turned into a giant concentration camp. I mean, I think that India's interests and values are much better served by a strong partnership with its fellow democracies than by hanging around with dictatorships.
And if I could just say, I want to compliment India for saying that they're not going to join the rest of the BRICS nations in backing an alternative, a gold-backed dollar alternative for trade. That was really encouraging.
May I ask a question, please?
Next question.
Hello,
ma'am.
Who has the mic?
My question is to Kala Sands. My name is Sanjay Kumar. I'm from New Delhi. I do understand the thought process behind the tariffs, like China Shock 1.0, 2.0 is going on. The Vice President J.D. Vance spoke, hilly-billy. But the technology, AI technology being stopped, you are not giving it to China. They came up with DeepSeek, under $60 million. What is the guarantee that the tariffs will work when China today is talking about that the elephant and dragon should dance together?
Right, and they snuck those chips out of the GPUs out of Singapore, I think it was. That China has a history of stealing, both in actual fact and IP theft and forced technology transfer and a lot of bad behaviors that shouldn't be acceptable. And I'm encouraged that we can have trade with fellow nations that we have security cooperation with, but this is going to happen. They're going to develop great chips because they have purpose to do it and they have good developers. I'm encouraged also that Taiwan is investing in the US and will be able to manufacture chips in the US. I think that it's really important that the like-minded countries win in this race for quantum computing and AI. I think it's an existential threat if we do not win, and if China wins. I wouldn't like to see the world that's created 20 years later. I think it's terrifying, but I hope I answered your question.
I finally should ask this
Let's
question. I have to go three
Okay.
times. The last one, ma'am. I'm Kaustav Burva. I'm representing a think tank called the Attaché. This is for the entire panel, whoever wants to answer the question. For any other ideology to sustain, we definitely know that there should be an hegemonic consolidation which takes care of it well. So considering the WTO's wonderful mechanism, which is the dispute resolution mechanism, for any other trade war that has to happen in any other person or any other country for that matter who wants to go and complain at the WTO dispute resolution mechanism, we know that the dispute resolution mechanism has to have a certain number of officers, certain number of adjudicators, going on to the question of the quorum. So the present quorum of WTO dispute resolution mechanism has not been met. So how do we take care of this war of trade and tariffs again? This is my question. Whoever wants to answer it. Thank you so much.
I think for the US, the age of multilateralism is over, and we're going to be seeking bilateral relationships in trade because we can address the non-tariff barriers as well as the tariffs, to have reciprocity and encourage lower tariffs overall and lower barriers. We haven't been treated so well in trade, and there are a lot of barriers to American goods around the world.
So I'm just going to add one point to that. As I said, the U.S. does not feel as though it has been very well treated. And, the reaction of the room on, on the point that was made about the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, tells me that you all think that's where the story ended. If you're a woman in Afghanistan, the story is not over by a long shot. And who else is engaging in a systematic way? I'm not saying the U.S. is perfect. It's not. And I don't think we're trading multilateralism for bilateralism. I think we're trading multilateralism for microlateralism. And it's not just us. I think everyone is going to issue-based transactions for the moment. Is this where we're going to be 5 years from now? I don't know. But wherever it is, I hope I'm not limited to what I can think of at this moment.
So,
We'll have it with one lady, please.
oh, yeah.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, everyone. My question is simple, that today we talk about that countering China. And my question is, did we really counter China, or is it a theoretical concept only?
Did we counter China at all? Have we been able to counter China? Yes, please. Yes.
Well,
So it's a very good question. I get what the US is doing regarding China, but frankly, it's backfired. And exactly that's the spirit of that question, because where's the alternative? I mean, I would get it if the US would say, look, this is your trade agreement here for India, here you go. We are building our supply chains here. There will be what we call non-red supply chains, and forget about imports from. I mean, I would get that as a counteroffer. But where is the counteroffer? Where are the trade deals? Where is the investment? You're actually bringing investment to the US, which I get it. But where is the investment that the US will make in all of these countries, asking for an alternative to China? Where is it?
very, very briefly, no one says we've got to counter India, because India doesn't threaten anyone. And we will only want to counter China while China, under its communist leadership, bullies all its neighbours and ultimately has hegemonic ambitions. And my hope is that at some point in time, the good people of China will decide that they are owed a much better government than they've currently got, and a much better system than they currently have.
That's a good point to wrap on. Thank you very much, all of you.